A slave is a slave, an inferior, a tool, an object, a property that you use for help. There is no justification, no excuse to this at all. There is no justification, no excuse to this at all.
So, okay, slavery, you want to talk about slavery? There's a very interesting quote from this anthropologist named David Graeber. He wrote a book called Debt, a 5,000-year history. But he's an accomplished anthropologist. Anyway, he says that if we brought someone like Aristotle, or we brought someone from the past to modern society, that figure from the past would think that most people in society are in fact slaves. Okay? They're actually in fact slaves, because our understanding of what is slavery, when we use that word, we think about chattel slavery, we think about 12 years a slave, things like this, these kinds of images of racial chattel slavery. And this is actually not historically universal. That's in America's history of transatlantic slavery. But most slavery in history did not look like that. In fact, every civilization, without exception, practiced slavery and slave labor within history, including Europe and so forth, with feudalism and transatlantic slavery, as I mentioned. So when it came to pre-modern societies, if one side defeats another side, you have two countries in a war, then what do you do with the losers? What does the losing side do? You either slaughter them or you enslave them. You can't just let them go and return, because they're going to be angry, they're going to reproduce, get stronger, and then come and pose a threat, an existential threat. Okay, so that's something that had to be the case in pre-modern societies, and the slavery of Islam was not racially based. It was based on prisoners of war. In fact, Islam limited the avenues of entrance into slavery, and Islam was very good at integrating these conquered people into Muslim society, where the slave class ended up becoming very powerful and very knowledgeable, educated Muslims within overall Muslim society, because the Islamic state, Islamic law was not based on race, it was based on belief, as we discussed already. So, but the liberal mind has a problem with this idea of owning a person, right? Would you say that's the case? Because at the end of the day, okay, Islam treated slaves great and nice. That doesn't address the fundamental moral problem with slavery, according to the liberal mind. According to the liberal mind, ownership. It doesn't matter if the slave is living the life, an opulent life, but as long as he's owned, that is the problem. And the response to that is, historically, slave labor was the dominant form of labor. Wage labor was actually relatively rare. And there was a debate historically around the time of the Industrial Revolution in American history, where wage labor was increasing. And there was a debate on whether slave labor and wage labor are really distinct. Is there really a fundamental difference between wage labor and slave labor? And the argument that people would use is that slavery, is there a difference between owning someone versus renting someone? And this is a conceptual debate that they had, and many non-Muslim Western thinkers, liberal thinkers, argued that no, renting someone is worse, because think about the difference between owning a car and renting a car. When you rent a car, you drive it, in a very abusive kind of way, as opposed to owning it, where that's your investment, you care about it. Anyway, so that's something that's uncomfortable for people who are raised in the West, but this is actually a reality, and this conceptually, this idea of renting a person versus owning a person, there was no distinction between it. If you were a wage laborer historically, you might as well have been a slave. It's the same thing. It was the same thing within all of these societies. Even feudalism. Is feudalism really different from slavery, even though you're given wages and you're given a portioned, a certain livelihood? Is that really different from slavery? No, it's a basic concept. So the concepts, the legal concepts underlying slavery exist within the employer-employee contract of wage labor, and it's a cultural difference. In many cultures, there's not really a difference between saying that person A, like Ridvan, owns George. Okay, that's a slave relationship. Ridvan owns George. There's not really a difference between that and saying that George has a contractual obligation to Ridvan. Okay, because they both imply force. If you're contractually obligated to someone, that implies force, because if you don't pay up and you don't meet the contract, then you're liable to be punished by the law or punished by Ridvan. And Ridvan can extract that debt from you by force, and if you don't pay up, he can prosecute you. The sheriff can come and can execute you. So there's inherent violence in all contractual agreements, and this is something that leftist and communist thinkers were arguing in the 20th century, because they wanted to say that capitalism is essentially coercive. capitalism is no different than slavery. And so you have this entire communist, leftist, Marxist tradition of arguing that capitalism is really fundamentally no different than slavery. So these are things that we can analyze and talk about at great length, but these are some of the ideas that we should pursue in our hunger for truth.
Because I completely agree that slavery is an essential part of human history. For example, you would think that I will come with one of these typical imbecile objections, and will think, oh, slavery is evil. How dare people enslave people in history? How dare the Confederates do this and Muhammad do this and do that? No, I don't think like that at all. I think that slavery is completely historically, logically justified.
There is no justification, no excuse to this at all. There is no justification, no excuse to this at all.